Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, welcome everybody to this week's Climate and Coordination RCAST. We have a wide variety of stories to discuss today, as usual. And this first one comes from Politifact. And I guess it's not really much of a story, just kind of, I guess I'm posing a question to everybody, which I think is possibly not answerable right now. But anyway, Politifact, if anybody's not familiar, is a website where independent fact checkers check basically anything that you want that gets posted on the internet and rates it from false to true with some gradients in there, mostly false or whatever. Anyway, there was a former oil executive that posted something on Instagram in 2017 mentioning that basically climate change couldn't be real because mortgage companies and banks are still giving out 30 to 40 year mortgages. And so he said, oh, well, since they're doing this, that means that climate change isn't happening.
Such
so
lovely
glad to hear you laugh early in the morning. And so, of course, Politifact, debunked this and said, no, the science behind climate change is extremely reliable. This is definitely happening. And one of the points that they used to debunk this, and I didn't know this is the part I wanted to share with everybody, is it says as far back as 2016, Sean Piketty, who was the president and chief economist of federally chartered mortgage buyer Freddie Mac, warned that the potential damage that climate change and rising sea levels will have on the housing market is, quote, likely to be greater in total than those experienced in the housing crisis and Great Recession. So, Freddie Mac, that entire company was very wrapped up in the housing crisis. So I think that they would know if climate change was going to be more severe than that. And they're saying it will affect the housing market more than that. But my question, so obviously this Instagram post was rated as, false. My question, I guess, is like, do you all think there's a reason why obviously the banks tend to still give people mortgages that are that long when the effects of climate are going to be increasingly severe? Obviously, people cannot afford necessarily to pay for a house in 10 years. Sometimes people need more time, which is, I think, pretty standard. I think that the lenders, basically, the reason they're doing this is because, number one, most people can't afford houses any other way except for a long mortgage. So, of course, they want to make their money. Also, I think it's highly probable, given the behavior of most banks in other crises and also the housing market, is that they're just in absolute denial. And they're just really hoping that maybe it won't be as bad as they think it is. But like many industries, possibly housing is very exposed to climate chaos and climate destruction, and they just really haven't figured out a way to protect themselves financially. And of course, most industries have not come to terms with what the world is going to be like in 30 or 40 years, so they're not protected either. Anyway, I would love to know if anybody had thoughts about this.
I saw something very similar, Nora, in the British press, and somebody even argued with me, I think, on Facebook about this. And it was almost the same story, not quite, but it was almost the same story, and it was about flood insurance. Right, they used that one, and I think the reality is, if you look at, I mean, I've worked in insurance companies, so I know how underwriting works. And I know how risk is calculated for mortgages. So there are two things here that are at play. One is the cash flow of those organizations that offer mortgages. If they were to suddenly reflect the true cost of the mortgages longer term, right? So 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? If they were to reflect that true risk, they would have a cash flow problem, right? They can't afford to lock out people because they need that cash in. And 10 years of cash now is better than 10 years of cash in 10 years' time for all of them. So they're never going to they're never going to have a cliff where they suddenly raise it. And when you look at how mortgages and insurances work over time, I'm sure if you're in Florida, in the Keys, or if you're in Pensacola or somewhere like that, any low-lying areas that are prone to weather, for instance, I'm sure over time, if you charted the cost of that insurance, the cost of those mortgages locally, it is reflective of those risks. So that's number one. Number two is, I don't think they have an actuarial model that models the risk of climate change because it's too far out. I mean, it'd be very hard to do it because you'd need a topographical map that would interact with the risk profiles, and they're not sure. You know, it's all speculative, science led, but speculative in as much as they don't have key data points that are big enough for them. And so actuarially, they have not modeled the risk. And that's the only reason. It doesn't mean, to some extent, you can consider the insurance companies and the mortgage companies are in part behaving like an ostrich. They have their head in the sand. But in the other way, they have their head up because they're looking at the potential downsizing of cash flow to their businesses, which would jeopardize their businesses. And when you think of all the execs, how are they compensated? Are they compensated in blocks of 10 years? No. So their risk and what they're prepared to do to get cash flow in will always err on the side of get cash in now. Short term. That's my view.
I was gonna,
in a nutshell.
Yeah, I was gonna summarize it as greed. Just short and simple. The reason they're not doing that is because
cash flow now,
greed versus responsibility.
Yeah, that probably sums it up. But it's sad, you know. I'd like to say that I see what you're saying, Steve, that they don't probably have enough like widespread data, but there are increasingly fewer and fewer places in the world where a house would be protected from the effects of climate, especially when you add in heat and drought and shortage of fresh water. So it's like they can look at other places, you know, they look at
but it's the predictive
in the Midwest
side of
or whatever.
The analytics, right? It's the predictive side. So they tend to raise prices after a hurricane, right? Or after a flood. They don't tend to do it before. So they don't do the predictive risk, right? They do it after the the horse has bolted, then they'll shut the stable door. And at the moment, right, at the moment for them, the stable door is open and the horse is getting ready to bolt, but for them, the horse has not actually bolted yet. And of course, by the time the horse has bolted and they try to shut the door, the horse is gone. So then you'll see a massive change in the whole of the mortgage market and the whole of the insurance market. You'll see that massive change. It is lemmings off a cliff.
Well, and also possibly the government
blinded by greed, lemmings off a cliff.
Totally, and possibly they're thinking the government will help bail a lot of these situations out with the flood insurance program, which I understand is owned by the government, isn't it? So possibly they're hoping that the government will step in and save everyone, which is terrible.
Well, the government did it in 2008, so they've got precedent there.
Absolutely. I just don't think it's fair to rely on the government to bail everybody out when other people have access to the science. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, another side to that is, for health insurance, supposing that you live near a freeway, right? So, and you have children and you've got health insurance, then it would be very interesting to see, will the health insurers give you the same insurance cover as somebody that lives in the suburbs in a nice green leafy area without lots of major roads, right? Because if they do give you the same, they're not acknowledging pollution. Right. If they don't give you the same, they are acknowledging pollution. And the data point, the significant data point, which I think I've mentioned in a previous call, is that it was only, I think, earlier this year that retrospectively a death certificate of a young girl here in the UK was changed, and her death was recorded as an asthma attack brought on directly through pollution because she lived near to a major road intersection. That's the first time in the world that a death certificate has given pollution as the cause of somebody's death.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
see what that does to health insurance.
Sure, and then beyond that, there's even a huge environmental racism awakening happening all over the world, that people are realizing that people who are not white tend to live in areas with much more pollution, which is obscene and totally unfair. And yeah, that does get back to health insurance. So anyway, the next article is from Morning Consult. This is a poll that was published on April, let's see if it says here, sorry, April 27th. And it says here, half of US voters now characterize climate change as a critical threat. Interest in being party to the Paris Agreement has remained steady since 2017 at roughly 60%. So basically what that means is about 60% of people believe that there should be some kind of formal global cooperation on climate. But what's so interesting is that the people who have, and by the way, critical threat is the highest of the four. There's don't know, not an important threat, an important but not critical threat, and then a critical threat. And that's, so the important but not critical is over 75% of the US public. Hopefully that 26% on top of the 50% that believe it's a critical threat. Again, this is of all voters. Hopefully that will start to go up, because it is definitely, I just don't understand how you can see climate as an important but not critical threat. It's like, oh yeah, that is happening, but let's wait 5 more years. I just don't understand the logic on that. But anyway, the percentage of people in America that understand this issue is going up. So just to let you know, from 2017, the percentage of people voters, all voters who believed it was a critical threat was 40%. So it's gone up by 10% in only about 4 years, which is, I think, significant. but also really showing that more people are becoming devastated. I think probably the orange skies in the western part of the United States probably had a big piece to do with that. The horrible flooding in the Midwest that destroyed people's lives, that was probably a big piece of it. Probably the increased storms in Florida and other places probably made people realize it. So I just wanted to say that the polling in America is going up on this, and as it should. Possibly it's not quite as strong as it could be, but I feel that it's a lot more strong than it was even 5 years ago.
Very interesting. You know,
that helps at least.
There was a radio segment done earlier, I think it might have been a couple of days ago on Radio 4. It's a news program called, I think, PM, on at 5 o'clock in the UK. And they got in this habit during the Trump era, and as it transitioned out of the Trump era, of bringing onto the program 4 Americans, all from the same family. So there was 2 sisters and 2 brothers. And one of the brothers was rabidly pro-Trump, and the other brother was sort of like, I'm not even sure I want to bother voting. I don't like anyone. And the 2 sisters were in different shades. They were supporters of Biden, one avidly and one not quite so avidly. So it was interesting talking to these 4 siblings about voting and polls like the one that you've got there. Because they said that the Trump one said that actually, you know, there's not that many people really support Trump. It's only like 50% or something like that. But what was interesting was that the pro-Trump sister pointed out that when people were asked about the policies that the Biden administration was enacting, that there was widespread support. And this was about bipartisanship, really. That's what they were talking about. So coming back to your poll, and they said that many of the policies, they've got 60+% of people agreeing with what Biden is doing and the policies that are being put forward, including, you know, the sort of green agenda policies. And, you know, coming back to yours, you know, you sort of postulated this question: why is it people think it's an issue but don't think it's important? I think that there might be a couple of reasons for that. One is this sort of whataboutism attitude, and the Republicans, by and large, Republican supporters tend to use whataboutisms all the time. So confronted by the undeniable evidence that climate change is true, and agreeing to that as a Republican, the temptation for many, I'm sure, is to say, but yeah, there's nothing we can do about it. What about China? What about India? There'll be that whataboutism, which is why I think some people think it's not important, because they don't actually think it matters what you do here if China and others aren't doing it. And they're very parochial in their view. So they don't see that China and other countries are doing stuff about it.
Yeah, and guess how many countries say, what about the US?
Indeed.
A ton.
Indeed.
You know, you think that anybody in Spain or France or any other country wants to do anything about their emissions when the US has emitted the most? Maybe we're not the highest polluter by year now, but from the beginning of time, hello.
I mean, for the last 15 to 20 years, all I've ever heard from the right wing that are climate deniers, or those that might actually say, well, climate is an issue, they always come out with, but what about United States? What about China? They'll always do that.
Yeah, well, that's sad. And, you know, this is not an issue where we can afford for any country not to be involved. Like, we have to go so past that. And, you know, we share the same sky. We share the same ocean. We share, you know, like, what can you say to, I mean, yeah, what about China? Great. So does that mean that if we get China in, that you're down to help? I mean, I understand if people want to say, well, I don't want to change my lifestyle, or I don't want to pay taxes toward, you know, whatever, unless other countries are going to do something similar. Great. So we have the Paris Accords. So, like, that's what that is. You know, it's a non-binding but competitive agreement from nations all over the world to hopefully exceed their goals And, that's exactly what that's why we had the Kyoto Protocol. That's why we've had all these friggin' summits for so long that are largely ineffective, is because countries say, yes, I'm in, are you in? And they all agree and they all say yes. And then Donald Trump comes along and says, you know what? I'm over it. Let's just be the only country not to do it. And then all of a sudden things start to fall apart. Luckily, a lot of governors and business owners and state leaders and different people said, screw that. I don't care if the US is supposed to be in. We're just going to stay in. So a lot of people honored the commitments anyway, which thank God, because every person who is helping is, saving us critical time.
Yeah. One of the things that I would love to happen, because I know that, for instance, that Darryl's thinking about us partnering with the Crypto Climate Accord. And no, undoubtedly, Darryl, you'll talk a bit more about that. No, I was thinking about that earlier today, about what can we do? What can we do? Okay, we've got our blockchain, but what can we do over and above? And working on this RChain file browser, the self-sovereign file browser, over the last couple of weeks, with Raphael and Theo involved and Jim involved too, it dawned on me that we can decentralize evidence of climate change. We can decentralize the evidence gathering. And one of the problems with doing that has always been authenticating the information. But with the file browser that we've got, we could put a kind of climate change skin on it and construct a reward mechanism with something like the Crypto Climate Accord, which is companies who can reward people for authenticated or verified evidence of climate change, with the climate change, pictures, audio, movies, whatever, stored on our blockchain and made available to researchers who might come to the Crypto Climate Accord to gather evidence.
It's interesting, Steve, that you mentioned that, because one of the reasons I started building a precursor to RChain was to do the same thing for the biotech industry. Right? There are lots of data sets. You don't want to launch a drug campaign, like developing a drug, unless there's serious consensus around the results. Right? You need an article in Nature that's been peer reviewed. You need some data sets that lots of scientists have looked at, and the reason is entirely economic. Typically drugs take 10 years and $1 billion to bring to market, and then it's sort of like Hollywood, right? It's either a blockbuster or you kind of look for aftermarket sales. And so they're very cautious about entering into those kinds of development plans without a lot of consensual evidence. So the thought was, create a decentralized database where you have the ability to verify the data sets. But at the same time, you can look at the 2008 financial bust as exactly the same kind of thing, right? There were these financial models that only 10,000 eyes were looking at, and so those 10,000 eyes had this massive advantage over everyone else, because they could go, oh well, we can see what's about to happen, and we're going to exit quickly from various positions. Whereas a lot of people were completely screwed by the 2008 housing bust, right? But if those financial models were up in the cloud, right, where they were in a decentralized store that people could investigate, then instead of 10,000 eyes, you have 10 million eyes, and they can say, the emperor has no clothes. These bonds that you're bundling up don't actually amount to anything, and so you're gonna tank the economy.
Yeah, I mean, two observations. Go ahead.
The point I was making is that this ability to have a decentralized verified data has applications across the board, it appeals both to the super cold-hearted just business people, as well as those people who are really, really genuinely concerned about our quality of life here on planet Earth, and everything in between. So the point I'm trying to make is just this is an enormous boon to be able to provide decentralized storage with verification processes. It's just a huge value prop in and of itself.
So here's the thing that I was thinking about as well, because I was thinking about the economic model around this. So the beauty of decentralization is it often inverts the pyramid of value, so that that everyone gets a little bit, right? So, which is much better. It's much fairer in terms of distribution of value in society as a whole. So the challenge, if you have a mechanism where you offer up this data, this climate change data, I was thinking, well, if you offer that up and you give a reward on the other side, and it's not valid, validated, right? You kind of want a disincentive, because you don't want people just trying it out, right? They've got to genuinely think that the artifact they're uploading really is a climate change artifact, right? So the economic model behind this, which is if you've got the file browser, so you've got that DApp and you've got Rev to put in the slot, right? Because you're going to store stuff, right? And everything that you store, you're paying for ultimately, right? Might be tiny amounts, but you're paying. So if the interested parties interested in that data, and there's a validation authority as well to validate the data, are in some form or another collaborating. So the fact that the validator is validating, and that the validator is known in some way and trusted, tempers the economic greed that might ensue, because only validated data would get the reward. So once you link that together and put the economic model in place, then it self-polices. So the number of false positives over time goes down. And not only that, the additional benefit is it educates the people that are collecting the data to collect higher quality data that they can be more sure will be validated.
Yes, I mean, this is we've already had a version of this, a first generation version of this, which is Wikipedia, right? So
yes.
Wikipedia is many times more valuable when the data is valid, and so there's a huge motivation for people to police Wikipedia, and so we've seen it in action. We've already seen that it's doable, and it's perfectly reasonable economic model.
It's the disincentivization of doing a bad job is that you end up paying Rev for stuff that you have put on the chain, and exactly. and that's a disincentive. And so if Wikipedia operated the same way, it can't. I mean, but if you imagine now decentralizing Wikipedia in this way, so that those that put in stuff to Wikipedia that's valid and is said to be valid by some authority that makes that decision, which doesn't have to be one authority, it could be a kind of a voting mechanism across a range of authorities, then that validation mechanism really teaches people to be more accurate, which is something that you don't get in Wikipedia. So you get people making changes and then other people backing them out. And over time, the signal attenuates and sort of reaches a steady state, so that there's belief in what's there, but not in all cases. Some are challenged. But sure. This would put that this would manifest itself into the economic model behind the collection of data and the reward system for it. Totally changing it. But I think it's really an interesting prospect. And Darryl, I don't know if you were going to talk about the crypto climate stuff.
Well, I did have one more story, but if
go for it.
if you want to get to that first, we could do that. But okay.
Yeah, go for the story, and then we'll.
Okay, well, it's a short one. I just wanted to end with a piece of good news, and then I'll turn it over to Darryl, because I'm sure he has a lot of great stuff to talk about. This is from Bloomberg, and I just found it kind of last minute, but it made me feel so happy. But this is actually from January, so it's quite old. But anyway, I felt that since it's an ongoing project, it's relevant. It says, a green transformation for the world's most beautiful avenue. They're basically going to re-green the Champs-Élysées, which, if people have been to Paris, it's like the huge, it's very hard to describe how big it is, but it's a huge avenue, boulevard kind of street leading up to the Arc de Triomphe, which is that circle, beautiful circle in the center of the city with the beautiful arch above it. And this is apparently going to take about 10 years to do, and it's going to cost, it says $300 million. But basically what they're going to do is they're going to minimize the traffic there. They're going to take out part of the street that cars can drive on, and they're going to they said they're going to greatly increase the area's tree cover and seek to encourage more small-scale shops along the avenue's flanks. It's called Re-enchanting the Champs-Élysées. They're hoping to finish it by 2030, so it'll take them probably about 9 more years. They basically just want to make it a huge garden and a huge park, that entire area. And I think it's such a cool thing to do, because first off, it's going to help increase biodiversity, going to make the air cleaner, going to make it safer for pedestrians because there's going to be less cars. I think it'll really invite a lot more business to the area because there'll be a lot more natural shade and places for people to sit down and talk and eat or do whatever. And also, I think it will also, probably help with climate change, depending on, I think you kind of have to plant a lot of trees to help with climate change, but obviously this could really help with providing homes for bees and birds. And so anyway, I just wanted to make this announcement that Paris is going to get a huge transformation over the next few years. So I can't wait to go back again and visit Paris when this happens, because I think it'll be a great project. So I just wanted to share that.
That's great news. Great news. I got married in Paris.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I lived in Paris on the west, on the left bank, near the near the Notre Dame. I could see Notre Dame out of the window. So to think that the Champs-Élysées is going to be greened in some way is a wonderful story. I must say that the one person on this call that I can see definitely in my mind's eye in Paris in a little jazz club would be you, Nora.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, I love Paris. And Steve, I just think you really know how to live from what you've told us about your life. Okay, so Darryl, please take it away.
Oh, okay. I have something to talk about now that is completely not a segue in any way. It's quite a different subject, but it's something that kind of is important to me, and hopefully you'll agree. But it's kind of connected to some news that happened this week. So this week, Apple's controversial iOS 14.5 was released, and it is controversial mainly due to its new ATT, or App Tracking Transparency feature that, quote, lets you control which apps are allowed to track your activity across other companies' apps and websites. So the reason why it's controversial is mainly in Facebook's mind, because Facebook's business model is built around that. They have built up a dependency on the ability to spy on our activities. And so they kind of need to be able to do that to continue with their business model. So, Apple just dropped that bomb, and the official launch of a new war has begun. Apple and Facebook now officially hate each other. And I believe that I know where the forum where this war is going to be waged. And the forum might not be on a lot of people's radar right now. So a couple of weeks ago, this is connected now. So a couple of weeks ago, I sprung for an Oculus Quest 2. It is a standalone VR headset that doesn't need to be tethered to an external computer. It just works out of the box. The UI is pretty darn good, and it doesn't take long to get up and running and embark on a journey into virtual worlds. You can look at a large library of 360-degree experiences on the YouTube VR app. You can watch 3D movies as if you're in a movie theater in an app called Big Screen. You can collaborate remotely with teams while accessing your computer's desktop in the same virtual office space with an app called Immersed. And of course, play tons of games, and the list is growing each day. So you guys know who owns Oculus, right?
I don't know.
Facebook.
Oh, interesting.
So Facebook bought Oculus about 7 years ago. So for me, the Oculus Quest 2 represents a consumer product that will probably continue to sell in large numbers this year, but it won't quite be the one everyone buys on monthly payments through their mobile provider. For that, we will have to wait until next year when Apple joins the battle with their own play. So Apple appears to be rumored to be releasing a what's called mixed reality headset in 2022. Mixed reality, meaning AR and VR. So this device, there's a lot of info about it. There's apparently a dozen or more cameras for tracking movement and showing the real world to the wearer, coupled with 2 8K displays, giving it resolution that would far outstrip anything currently on the market. It's going to be a fully sealed headset. It's going to be quite expensive, around $3,000. So Apple seems very serious about this play. They moved their head of engineering, Dan Riccio, to a top secret project many believe is VR and AR. Reportedly, this device will weigh less than an iPhone. So we have Facebook and Apple both very aggressively. Apparently, was it 20% of Facebook's employees have been shifted to their VR department? So there is a huge battle forming, and the whole kind of focus of this battle, and Mark Zuckerberg kind of talks about it in this interview that I discovered. The whole here, I'll do a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. I think it really makes sense for us to invest deeply to help shape what I think is going to be the next major computing platform. This combination of augmented and virtual reality to make sure that it develops in this way that is fundamentally about people being present with each other and coming together. So the basically what's happening is next year you're going to see the beginning of the next stage in computing, the next stage in a device that will be a computing platform, and it will be VR and AR. I'll just kind of play, if I could, a little blurb from the interview with Mark Zuckerberg.
So, at the end of the day, today, most of what Facebook does is, we're building on top of other people's platforms. But, today, I think it really makes sense for us to invest deeply to help shape what I think is going to be the next major computing platform, this combination of augmented and virtual reality, to make sure that it develops in this way that is fundamentally about people being present with each other and coming together. And there are going to be all these awesome use cases that come from this, not just, the ability in the future to, rather than calling to someone or having a video chat, you just kind of snap your fingers and teleport, and you're sitting there in their on their couch, and it feels like you're there together. It's not just going to be like a video chat where you can see the person. You'll actually be able to interact with them. You'll be able to take out games or other objects and instantiate them as virtual objects and interact and get work done and play games together and all of that. And I also think it's going to have a big society-wide impact on a lot of things that we care deeply about, like climate change. Because, look, we're here. It's 2021. It's a lot easier to move bits around than it is atoms. right? So, obviously there are going to keep on being cars and planes and all that, but, the more that we can teleport around, not only are we personally eliminating commutes and stuff that's kind of a drag for us individually, but I think that's better for society and for the planet overall too. So there are a lot of reasons to be excited about this, and I'm excited to go deep on this.
So yeah, this is real now. The two of the biggest big tech companies, and probably some of the others, are devoting major resources to introducing VR and AR to the world. And next year is going to be a huge year because Apple's going to enter the fray with their first device, and it'll be something you can buy on your cell phone plan. So yeah, I'll stop here. I've got a lot more to say about it, but I'm just kind of curious what everyone thinks about this.
I don't understand what is the connection to climate. Like, are you going to be able to like view your park like with high sea level? Like, what is it?
No, what he's getting at, this is his take. And Mark Zuckerberg tries to be all nice and cuddly, right? There's I don't totally. Quite,
it's all about togetherness. Yay.
His horns are kind of easy for me to see, but some people have a harder time. But no, what he's talking about is the idea that people the telecommuting concept and the need to travel will be reduced because you'll be in their presence. And I can play another excerpt where he actually reveals a lot more about what his vision of how that's going to work.
But not now, because we've only got 7 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on that. So I have one major point I want to make. So COVID has given us the opportunity to reflect on what's important to us in society. And during the lockdown phases that all of us may have experienced, the absence of human contact, the absence of touch, becomes quite a significant part of your psyche. And when I look at Findhorn is completely based on that notion of touch. When you do an attunement, you're actually holding people's hands. And the idea that you can't do that, the idea that that's somehow not a good thing to do during COVID, has really come to hit people. There's many people here who haven't seen loved ones in care homes for a long time. Give them a hug, right? My fear of this virtual world is that true relationships are lost. I mean, I don't have the same I have a pretty good relationship with you, Darryl, but I've never met you, right? And the same as Steve, but I've met Nora, and I've met Greg many times. And so I have a slightly different relationship with them because I was in their physical presence, right? And, and I think in Greg's case, I probably gave him a hug. Nora, I didn't know you well enough to give you a hug then. I would give you one now. And my fear is that this notion of virtual reality and augmented reality papers over the key social bonds that we form as humans on the planet. And that in turn results in a disconnectedness from the world around us, the climate we live in. I think we have to be very careful about how we use that sort of technology and how we can become an extension of the technology which blinds us to what's going on literally in front of us.
Oh man, I wholeheartedly agree with that. The fact of the matter is it's coming. So we have to either put our heads in the sand or we have to confront it.
I tell people the same message all the time right now, and I take them back to wonderful pictures that many people had put into the newspapers of building a hug curtain during the pandemic, a see-through shower curtain with holes cut out. And then you use really long carp fish gloves and paste them either side. So there's 2 going in one direction and 2 going in the other direction underneath. And then one person goes one side, one person the other. You put your hand in the gloves and you hug somebody. Safe. Why did we do that? Why do people come up with that if it's not important? I think that what that showed is humanity getting to grips with what truly is important to them. And actually, it turns out hugs are pretty damn important, and physical contact and proximity are pretty bloody important. I think you can use that technology to broaden your horizons, but don't do it at the cost of the people that are around you.
Yeah, I agree with everything, but this is a way bigger play. This is the future of computing. And it's basically when you apply what they're doing right now to what Vinay Gupta said at the beginning of the Mycelia event, who controls the database controls the future. If the future moves in a pathway where Facebook or Apple controls the database on the next computing platform, that's what my fear is.
But they won't be able to.
Is the new platform.
The issue is that what you're trying. VR is the UI. It's not the storage.
Yeah.
It's the interface. It's not the storage. Once people understand what blockchain is all about, they'll never go back. It's just like, would you be willing to go back to a time before the internet?
Hell no.
Right. So this is the same thing. Once people understand the benefits of storing stuff up in the cloud on chain, they'll never go back.
Yeah. That's exactly it. That's what I was actually going to conclude my whole thing with. So thanks, Greg.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, it's like Brave, right? And like Generate. If you can interpose between those damn cookies that are collecting all your data. So on this new platform, the same thing will happen. They'll have to open it up, otherwise they won't get the take up.
Yeah.
So they have to open up the APIs, and people will put things in between, and ideally put things in between that lead them to storing their data on chain and controlling it themselves.
So one point for people who are listening, maybe Nora, if you haven't read these, Ready Player One and Ready Player Two do a kind of deep dive investigation of the questions surrounding this. Within the vehicle of science fiction, but it's a fairly good analysis of the sort of the social trends, the computing trends, and all the things that are going to come together to create this aspect of the human computing interface. So it's definitely very entertaining, worth reading. They talk about this. So Ready Player One and Ready Player Two. Yeah, sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love reading, and unfortunately we're now out of time. So someday when we start our RChain book club, maybe those will be on the list. Well, thank you all for another great discussion. These seem to always fly by. And for anyone listening, please make sure that you're subscribed to RChain on YouTube, follow RChain on social media, and you can become a member at rchain.coop. And thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. So.